Okay, I am here. Good morning, good morning. Happy New Year from the food bank. I'm really excited to be talking to you all today. All right, let me get my coffee out of the way. Okay, so this morning I do not have a moderator. I'm all by myself. So if we have any questions pop up in the chat box, I will check those at the end of the video. My name is Kristen Elliott, and I am one of the registered dietitians here at the Atlanta Community Food Bank. And this is episode 16 of Quarantine Kitchen. So today I'm going to be talking about plant-based meals. So lots of people like to adopt the New Year's resolutions where their goal is to eat healthier. And one way you can do that is by incorporating more plant-based proteins into your meals. So I wanted to show you a couple of ways to determine if you're working with lentils, split peas, or dried beans. And then I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can make a family-friendly meal or two family-friendly meals with 1 pound of beans. Here we go. Okay, so first off today, I am making one of my absolute favorite recipes of all time. And I like to call it a Tex-Mex casserole. So it's a rice and beans casserole, and it doesn't have any meat products in it. So it is a vegetarian recipe because we do top it with cheese before we put it in the oven to melt the cheese and make it like cohesive as a casserole. So I am getting this mixture all ready to go so we can pop it in the oven because that takes a few minutes. So what I did here was I sauteed 1 onion and 1 bell pepper and a few cloves of garlic and some olive oil. And once the onion started to look clear, I added my seasonings, which was about a tablespoon of chili powder and cumin. And then I sprinkled a little bit of dried oregano on there. You can use a low sodium taco seasoning in place of those individual seasonings if you would prefer to do that. To save yourself just a couple extra minutes of time by just sprinkling from the packet of seasoning. That's totally up to you. So once my veggies looked good, my onions started to look clear, I added my seasoning to just toast it a little bit for about 30 seconds. Then I added 1 can of crushed tomatoes. So that is like a tomato sauce, but it's a little bit more chunky. And it's canned in tomato juice. So it doesn't typically have a ton of salt to it. So keep all of the juice from your crushed tomatoes, add that to your pan, mix it all together. That's what I just did, was add my tomatoes. And then on this step, you would generally simmer this to thicken it up. It doesn't look too juicy, too soupy to me. So I decided to skip the simmer step because it's not too juicy. So the protein I am using today that is plant-based are dried pinto beans. So these are my dried pinto beans. I'm going to talk about how I prepped them in just a minute. I'm going to get this in the oven. So here in my casserole dish, this is some cooked brown rice. I have 1 cup of brown rice that I cooked with my rinse, boil, steam method, which is very different from the package instructions. So check out the resource folder linked in the caption to see the perfect way to cook brown rice. So brown rice is cooked. And I layered it in the bottom of my pan, and then I'm going to pour my topping right on top of the rice. You've got a couple options here. You can pour it right on top and keep it separate, or you can mix your topping, which is your beans and everything, with your rice and then have the cheese on the bottom. So my preference when I make this is to mix it. I like to mix it. because sometimes the rice, I mean, it's just my opinion though, is it can dry out in the bottom depending on how hot your oven is and all of those like little things that can contribute to recipes coming out differently. I actually haven't made this in this kitchen before. This is my first time making it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it separated with my rice on the bottom, bean mixture on top, and then I'm going to take my cheese and I'm going to sprinkle it across the top. So the recipe calls for about 4 ounces of cheese. If you are working with a block of cheese, that's going to be about half of the block of cheese. You want to make sure you're sprinkling it all over and getting it close to the edges so you have a nice little like cheese crust. There we go. All right. So for the sake of the demonstration today, I bumped up the temperature of my oven so this will melt a little more quickly. If you were at home, you want to bake this for about 20 minutes at 350 degrees. So I'm going to get this in the oven. Okay, so I've got my timer on for about 10 minutes. So I wanted to talk to you about how I prepared my dried beans, my dried pinto beans, and how you can determine whether you want a lentil or a split pea or a dried bean. So this time around for my dried beans, I cook them in my slow cooker, which is the fastest, well, hands off, if you will, way to prepare your dried beans because you don't have to soak them. So this is the juice in the remaining beans that I have in my slow cooker. As you can see, there's my pinto beans. So when you cook them this way, you skip the soaking step and you are able to put them in the slow cooker for 8 hours on high temperature. And that's going to save you a lot of hands-on time or hands-off waiting around time. So you can do a quick soak method, which is a quick boil on the stove top and then turn the temperature off with your beans in the water and leave it there for an hour with the lid on it. That is quick soak, and you can also use that method. I prefer any dried beans to be cooked in the slow cooker on high for about 8 hours overnight. I cooked them overnight last night. So instead of soaking overnight and then the next day having to boil them for sometimes up to 2 hours, depending on the type of beans, you can skip the cooking step and you can do the soaking and the cooking all at the same time in your slow cooker. So I love to use the slow cooker for my dried beans. You can use this method for any type of beans, and garbanzo beans or chickpeas, which are the same, will take less time. So I'm going to show you my recipe card at the end so you can see where to find it and the difference in instructions there. So we're working with our dried beans protein today, but we've got some other plant-based proteins that are dry and very, very cost effective. So if you're looking at, say, a pound of ground beef versus a 1 pound bag of dried beans, you're going to get many more servings and meals out of your dried bag than you are going to get from your fresh ground beef. So it's very cost effective to use your dried beans. Another good option, if you don't have beans, is you can use dried lentils. So these are referred to as green or brown dried lentils. They may be called either name, green or brown, because they kind of have both colors here. And you can see that they are a full flat piece. That's not very clear. So that's our lentils. And then these are our split peas. So you can see that these split peas have been cut in half, and that helps decrease their cooking time. So in order of most to least cooking time, your dried beans are going to take the longest because they have to soak and then they have to cook for a while. Your split peas do not need to be soaked. They do not need to be soaked, but they're going to take still upwards to half an hour sometimes a full hour to get them fully cooked through to the very, very tender texture where they fall apart. That's what you're looking for your split peas. And then for your lentils, no soaking required, and they will be done cooking within about 20 minutes boiling. So these are your quickest method for cooking your lentils. So for this recipe, you can substitute lentils for any dried beans, and you can also substitute canned beans for any dried beans. So I wanted to point that out to you all. For my 1 pound of dried beans, I've made my casserole that I just put in the oven, but I also have a second recipe that you can use for the same batch of beans that you cooked in your slow cooker. And this is another casserole because it's really quick and easy to put together. So for this one, the original recipe calls for refried beans, but you can very easily take your pinto beans that you cooked in the slow cooker and mash them up and make them into the consistency of refried beans. There we go. So these are a little bit juicy than my original plan, but you can drain off that juice to make sure it's not too juicy. I'm just going to mash them. I'm using my potato masher here. You can also just use a regular kitchen fork. We'll also do this mashing for you really nice. My casserole dish here is greased, so nothing's going to come out. There we go. All right, so I've still got a little bit with some texture here, but I'm going to leave them in there. I'm going to take my spatula. I'm going to pour these down in the bottom. This works really well for a square baking dish because the amount of beans will cover the bottom very nicely. So I'm going to do is I'm going to just spread that out. I mean, refried beans never really look attractive, but they're so flavorful. And this is a lot easier to prepare them because you're not actually refrying them. They're cooked to perfection from the slow cooker. And then all you need to do is mash them up and they'll give you that refried consistency. Now you can actually make refried beans in your pot and cook them a second time if you prefer. So I've got beans here. I've got a can of diced tomatoes. You have the option to put your beans on the stovetop and heat them up and then mix in your diced tomatoes into the beans. You're welcome to do that, but you can also just toss them on top here, your little diced tomatoes. And then I'm gonna add some corn. This is one of those really small cans of corn because you don't need a ton. It's just a topping. There we go. Got my tomatoes and my corn. I'm gonna mix in my little Mexican seasoning. So this is the same. This is cumin and chili powder and oregano. You can mix this in or you can sprinkle it on top. My beans are very well seasoned because I added seasonings to them when I put them in the slow cooker. So you can choose whatever seasoning you like whenever you prepare this dish for your beans. So I knew I was going to make a Mexican or Tex-Mex inspired dish. So I decided to use cumin and chili powder and oregano. Those are all very taco seasoning flavors. So I've got my 2 toppings here on top of my beans. I'm going to sprinkle some cheese, which is the part that binds it all together. So now, my friends, if you are vegan and you're not eating any animal products, you may leave off the cheese here. You may use your cheese substitute products if you prefer. There we go. So I've got my refried beans casserole going in the oven now at the same time, just enough for the cheese to melt and get yummy. Y'all, this This other casserole just is beautiful and brown in the perfect amount of time. Okay, I'm gonna pull it out now. All right, 2 oven mitts. So that is gorgeous. Okay, so here is the beans and rice casserole. It is beautiful and brown on the top at 400 degrees for 10 minutes. That turned out beautifully. So let's see how this looks. So you also see how large this is. This casserole dish can serve 8 people for 1 meal, 8 servings, or it can serve 4 people for 2 meals. That's my favorite part about cooking, is making enough for leftovers. There we go. That's beautiful. Let me turn this around. So this open part is in here. There we go. So that is our beans and rice casserole. I like to call it Tex-Mex because it's not Mexican, it's inspired. So beautiful beans and rice casserole. I wanted to show you a couple of things that you can do with the same batch of beans. That's going to save you time cooking, especially if you're using the slow cooker, and will also extend how many times you can use it. I'm a huge fan of leftovers and preparing meals to fit that. So yes, you may use any type of beans in this casserole, not just pinto beans. The reason why I'm talking about beans and lentils and split peas is because we have a lot of them in our food bank inventory. So I wanted to share some ideas for using them in ways that will be family friendly, because this is very family friendly. It looks like lasagna, it tastes like tacos, and you don't really miss the meat component here. So this is a good option for a plant-based meal. Whether you are vegetarian or not vegetarian, we can all benefit from more plant-based proteins in our diet. Yes, my oven over here is beeping at me. Okay, timer is off. All right, so this is my casserole that is hot still. And you saw how quickly I kind of threw this together, especially if your beans are already prepared. My rice takes about 45 minutes to cook because that is the way brown rice works. It takes more time. So if you are in a rush and you have some boil in a bag style rice, that is done much more quickly. Or this works really well with leftover rice. So for instance, if you had this pot of pinto beans cooked, any type of beans cooked, and they're leftovers, you may also use leftover rice to prepare this casserole dish. So this is actually 1/2 of the way the recipe is originally written. So originally you would have like a big, large can of crushed tomatoes and more than 1 onion and extra amounts of beans, like two or 3 cans of beans, and that could make you 2 casserole dishes full of this dish. So it was going to feed a lot of people, and it will go a long way. I wanted to add that my favorite way to eat this dish is with pasta instead of rice, because brown rice is not my favorite. And you are not required to like brown rice. But if you like a whole grain pasta, like a whole grain bow tie or whole grain elbows, I like to use whole grain egg noodles. And with that, you can use the egg rolls in place of rice, and then that will give you another texture besides the texture of the rice, and it'll be a little bit like a Mexican pasta bake with beans in it. And that's the way I like to eat it. My best friend loves it with the rice. So what we would do is we would cook together. And since it makes 2 casserole dishes, we would split the topping with the beans and the tomatoes. And then she would have her rice and I would have my pasta. And then we would both eat for the week. We would eat our lunches together. So we've got lots of options here. I'm going to check over here since my oven appears to be really hot, considering how quickly that turned out. Ooh, that looks nice. Okay, not just yet. Okay, so I'm going to move this out of the way. So for plant-based meals, you do not have to only use beans and lentils and split peas as your proteins. You also have the option to use other sources of protein that are plant-based, like cheese. Excuse me, cheese is not one. Sorry, I'm getting distracted here. I'm trying to find my video so I can check with you guys and see if you have any questions. So other sources of plant-based proteins that you can use would be things like tofu or tempeh or things like that. Here we go. I found my video. I need to make sure to use other sources of protein. There we go. Okay, found my video now. So those things are maybe a little bit more unfamiliar to you, and they can take a good amount of time with prep in the same way that your dried plant-based beans and things would. So tofu generally needs to be pressed to have the liquid pulled out of it. So it is going to cook and be crispy and not soggy on the inside. So that's going to take up to half an hour if you're working with tofu. If anyone is interested in tofu for future episodes, please leave me a message and I will work that into an episode. But for today, I wanted to highlight our very cheap, shelf-stable, tons of servings per package, dried beans and legumes. Okay, I've got my messages up here. Let's see. Althea, hello. Heather, hello. Oh, I love all of my food bankers are here watching. Does anyone have any favorite ways that you like to eat beans in like a specific recipe or a specific type of bean that you would like to share? I would love to share with folks. Honestly, my favorite type of beans are pinto beans, and I use those today because we have them in our food bank inventory. But among some of the other inventory items that we have, you could use our dried Great Northern beans that we have currently in place of pinto beans here. I believe we've got dark red and light red kidney beans, and those would also work really well in our dishes today. And I want to repeat that the lentils are a really good substitute for dried beans, and they cook a lot faster. So with the lentils, you're going to get a similar texture as you would with beans. And they're also a good replacement for any ground meat products that you might typically eat, because it has a little bit of the smaller texture that the ground beef would have. So if you're looking for ways to start eating more plant-based, but not going cold turkey and cutting out all of your meats, a good way to do that is to start doing some recipes with half meat, half your plant-based protein. So for taco filling, for example, you can use your half of the recipe where you can do your ground beef or your turkey. And then for the other half, you can add in some lentils. And that is going to boost the overall nutritional quality of the recipe while giving you a little taste of what the plant-based is like before going cold turkey. And I like to make that recommendation for brown rice as well. If brown rice isn't your thing, but you want to, or your doctor recommended that you start eating more whole grains, or you talk to your dietitian.
Hello, I don't know if you can still hear me, but my main camera on my computer died. So I'm still here on my phone. So I was just talking about how you can try to incorporate more brown rice into your meals by eating half brown and half white rice. It's a way to make it easier for you to make that transition. So I'm going to navigate this for just a couple more minutes on my phone camera here. So bear with me. I'm going to go grab my casserole out of the oven. That sounds amazing. Okay, so little more DIY for this last little segment. So here is our casserole with the refried beans and the tomatoes and the corn. This is a really quick way to throw together a meal if you're in a hurry. With your beans that you already have cooked and left over, and some other shelf-stable canned goods. So I've got some whole grain crackers here just to show as a serving option. But you can serve this with tortillas, or you can serve it with, oh my goodness, you can serve this over rice if you wanted to. Okay, let's see. There we go. So my beans were just a little too soupy, and I talked about that at the beginning. I knew that was going to happen. There we go. All right. So here is some refried beans casserole with some whole grain chips. You can eat this like nachos, which is how I like to eat it. I'm a huge fan of refried beans. Not everyone is. So for my preference, I love to eat it as nachos. And that's really fun to incorporate some plant-based ideas with something that's a little more familiar or a little more comfortable for your kids, or say your spouse who's like the meat only kind of guy person. So anyway, I lost my comments in the chat when my computer died. So I'm going to, as soon as I get off here, I'm going to go check those and follow up with y'all. Thank you for tuning in with me today. I hope you try to incorporate some more plant-based proteins into your diet, whether you do it now because it's a new year, or you do it on next Tuesday because that's the day you feel like starting. Always remember, you don't have to only start on Mondays if you want to make a simple change to your meals. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will be live again in 2 more weeks. I don't have a topic picked out just yet, so if you have any ideas, drop them in the comment box. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks.